The Marriage of Heaven and Hell by William Blake. A review by Louis Hillenbrand. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is a book of poetry by English poet William Blake, who was born in 1757 and died in 1827. William Blake was born in London, where he spent most of his life apart from a 3-year sojourn in Felpham, a village in West Sussex. He grew up in a relatively comfortable household, the son of a hosier. Blake went to school only until the age of 10, merely learning how to read and write before he was educated at home by his mother. Although the Blakes were from one of the various Protestant denominations that had separated from the Church of England, William Blake was still baptized Anglican at St. James Church and educated into the study of the Bible, a pivotal decision from his parents that would affect his thought for the rest of his life. He eventually developed an interest for engraving drawings inspired by images depicting ancient Greek myths and legends that he found in books about the subject that his father bought him. This led his parents to have him be the student of engraver James Bazire. By the age of 21, after mastering his craft, William Blake had become a professional engraver and was sent by Bazire to perform engravings of religious icons in churches in London, including Westminster Abbey, whose intricate and diverse artistic designs and representations left a great impression on the poet. In 1779, he became a student at the Royal Academy of Arts. It was there that his rebellious nature started to burgeon. With his acquired skills and knowledge, he was quick to criticize visual artists and painters that had been the standards of European art up until that time. One of his opinions was that historical paintings expressing the artist's ideals were far more crucial than landscape paintings and portraiture for their own sake. Indeed, at the time, the hierarchy of painting subjects were history, portraits, everyday life, landscapes, animals, and still life. His virulent opinion pitted him against the director of the school, Sir Joshua Reynolds. However, he did befriend fellow artists with similar radical views such as John Flaxman and George Cumberland. Following his studies, he spent the rest of his days working as an engraver. After he married Catherine Boucher in 1782, he taught her how to read and write, and she became a great help with his illustrations and his personal works, including for the Marriage of Heaven and Hell. In this work that is part of his so-called prophetic works written in the style of biblical prophecies, he channeled his fascination for spirituality and his rebellious spirit. It was composed between 1790 and 1793. In terms of originality and daring, there is little to no work of the time that equals its genius. It is written in the manner of infernal proverbs to mirror the biblical proverbs, and also tells the symbolic tales of the poet meeting with both angels and demons. Indeed, a key concept like the title of the work suggests is the alliance of opposites in order to find harmony. It marks a departure from the strictly rational mind of the Age of Enlightenment into the emotional turmoil of early Romanticism. In the poems, demons are seen as being full of liveliness, as opposed to being condemned creatures, while angels are depicted as detached and rational minds. Opposition is true friendship, the poet insists, as he stresses that it is not by condemning one camp and exalting the other that one finds inner harmony, but by daring to embrace both the light and dark figures present in each individual. In a key passage called The Voice of the Devil, he writes, "All Bibles or sacred codes have been the cause of the following errors: that man has two real existing principles, viz. A body and a soul; that energy, called evil, is alone from the body, and that reason, called good, is alone from the soul; that God will torment man in eternity for following his energies. But the following contraries to these are true. Man has no body distinct from his soul, for that called body is a portion of soul discerned by the 5 senses, the chief inlets of soul in this age. Energy is the only life and is from the body, and reason is the bound or outward circumference of energy. Energy is eternal delight." The theme of daring is central to the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, as well as to the work and thought of William Blake at large. In an era in which the Church, though often questioned by Enlightenment thinkers, still obviously had a strong grip over the thought of the individual, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is not only a work that is greatly ahead of its time in audacity and artistic originality, but it also discloses wisdom to the reader who will take heed of William Blake's ideals. In a time that spoke of rational utopia and the perfection of man through the means of reason, Blake pointed at the existence of the dark side of man's psyche, and the necessity to acknowledge it. The way I see it, even though the Enlightenment thinkers sought to put Christian dogmas on their heads, they simply replaced one way of thinking about man and history's linear perfecting with another. In his poetry, William Blake points to the here and now, and what constitutes the totality of the human being, as opposed to what he ought to be according to any set of dogma or ideology. A bit before Blake's marriage, he was caught in a riot in June of 1780 in London against the revoking of sanctions against Roman Catholics. This experience likely contributed to his being interested later on in the development of the American and French revolutions. And although he was very excited to hear about them, he was still hesitant to fully support ideologies that toppled an authoritarian system only to replace it with another, even if supposedly in the name of the people. With that in mind, one has to wonder what his thoughts would be on our modern world professing freedom and democracy that still has its roots in these revolutions. It is only fair to assess that, like during his time, he would likely have a lot to say, as was the nature of his restless personality. In spite of having spent most of his life in London, his spirit was one of everlasting youth and vitality compared to most of his contemporaries. He was a very interesting individual with a compelling thought. While his was an ideal of rebellion, he still saw the intrinsic value of spirituality and religion as a way to expand one's spirit. He deeply admired poet John Milton, whose monumental classic of English poetry, Paradise Lost, he illustrated with exquisite engravings. He also wrote a poem called Milton, in which he goes on a symbolic and initiatory quest with the ghost of the poet. He saw the figure of Satan in Paradise Lost as the eternal rebel, and the text promoting personal rebellion and liberation without even being aware of it. He professed both Satan and Jesus Christ as figures going against the current, and forging their own narrative by embracing themselves fully, an ethos of fulfillment that is at the heart of this grand poet's ideals that he wrote down and illustrated masterfully throughout his life. In the end, William Blake stands out as a literary figure that carried English literature and contributed to carrying European literature at large from the classical era into the Romantic era in professing rebellion, embracing one's full being, and freeing oneself from any set of limiting beliefs. His contribution is arguably one of the most profound in all English literature, a true artistic genius both for his poetry and his unique style of engravings that mesmerize one with their originality. An artist who believed in the human being and did not endeavor to change him into anything other than what he is, born free, rebellious, and the seed of a genius that only requires one to look deep inside oneself to find, through light and dark, heaven and hell, and through their marriage, the totality and harmony of his being. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, please feel free to comment below to tell me your thoughts, give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel for more content of the like. I wish you all a wonderful day and hope to hear from you soon.